Manufacturing, preparing, and influence covers the management of activities related to the production of goods and services. Production management encompasses all aspects of the manufacturing process, including planning, organizing, directing, and regulating. With the rapid rise of product-based startup, it can be difficult to keep track of production timelines. For example, if you are a multi-channel retailer, wholesaler, or e-commerce brand, it can be difficult to keep track of everything accurately. Now, this is where the production management system come in the business. They enable you to track your goods and services in an efficient and accurate manner. So if you feel the need to dig deeper and know more about it, sit tight as we bring to you all the information that you need right on your screens. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, I want to request you to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any new update or video releases from Great Learning. If you enjoy this video, show us some love and like this video. Knowledge increases by sharing, so make sure you share this video with your friends and colleagues. Make sure to comment on the video for any query or suggestions, and I will respond to your comments.
Before moving on, let's talk about some of our learning objectives. So we will start by knowing what is production management, what are the functions of production management, and also the various components that are involved in production management. The various components we'll then study in detail about aggregate planning, what is the meaning of aggregate planning, how do you utilize the way in which aggregate planning is done. Then we'll talk about forecasting, what are the various methods in which you can forecast the demand for the coming months for any business entity or a company. So next we'll know about what is inventory control, how do you keep the total cost in check and at the minimum level while keeping your services at the top of the priority. Then we'll talk about what is economic order quantity that comes under the inventory control. Furthermore, we'll discuss about how do you manage the workstations under every department in any production facility. So that we'll know in assembly line balancing, and at the very end we'll know about how do you select a plant location, a plant facility when you're starting out a company, when you're starting out a production facility. So all that is covered in this particular course. So make sure you have your notepads ready because this is going to be a knowledge pack session. So stay tuned till the end. Now let's start with the first module, which is what is production management. Now in the most layman terms, what would we know about hearing this term, right? It would be something to manage, right? Managing some sort of production, some sort of manufacturing facility, some sort of, a thing that requires some steps involved in it, right? So the management of activities connected to the production of product and service is covered under the production management. Now, production management has certain elements to it, right? What it is planning, it is organizing, it's directing, and regulating the manufacturing process, right? You need a lot of planning involved so that you don't have any situations in which you are low on stock or high on stock, your inventory levels are maintained. So all these things need to be taken care of when we are doing production management. Also, during the planning phase, we need to see that if there are any risks involved, right? For example, during the COVID times, a lot of supply chains were disrupted, right? A lot of production activities were halted. So these things have to be planned well in advance. There should be risk management in it, right? So that the aspects of the business entity, the core of the business entity should be carried forward. It should not be a lag in the production activity that is happening. Because when it happens, what would happen if the raw materials would be piled up, if there is no production activity happening, if the supply chain is disrupted, you would have end materials that would be stocked out in your godowns. But to facilitate it in the more smooth process, in the most smooth manner, what is required is that you have optimum levels of production management. Now, production includes manufacturing because manufacturing requires production. Second is service. So it is not only something that we can touch, right? Some softwares like Excel we use and everything, they also considered as a production because it is a service that is provided. It has a beginning product and an end product to it. That is also involved. Third is the construction activities. Now, construction activities are also revolves around lot of production happening, lot of man force that is being utilized, lot of machines that are being utilized. So this thing also come under the production management. So now let's try to define this landscape. Let's define the landscape of production management. Now, when I start by saying that you have certain inputs and certain outputs. For example, if you have a land with you, right, and a farmer is there, he'll utilize that land to make some produce like rice or wheat or something like that, right? So he'll utilize that land to make a final product. Similarly, if you have a land and you set up an infrastructure, you add machines to it, then it becomes a production facility in which certain elements, certain things that you are doing, you'll produce it. Similarly to that, if there is a steel plant, right, you would have raw materials like iron ore, carbon, that would be utilized in the process to make the final product, that is steel, right? You would have a lot of machines involved in this picture. You would have a lot of departments, different sort of departments or different sort of activities, right? To cater to all that thing, you require a good production planning. You would require good planning well in advance so that you are in a more smooth manner conducting your operations, right? So let's start by what is the thinking, what is the thought process behind starting any of this. So the first question that we ask to ourselves before we produce anything is, what do you want to manufacture, right? What do you want to manufacture? You would have a solid reason for that, right? So initially, what would you require? You would require the product design, you would require the product development, you would have prototypes in picture, so that everything that you do has a smooth process to it. The second part is, where do you manufacture, right? To manufacture something, you would require a setup, you would require a land to do it, you would require plant location, and you would select the layout in which departments would be segregated within that particular area. Third part would be, how much would you manufacture? What is the limit to which you can manufacture? So for that, you would need the process planning and you would need various activities involved onto which how you can produce that particular thing. Furthermore is, when do you produce, when do you manufacture that thing, right? So you would need a proper scheduling, you would require job scheduling, you would require manpower scheduling. For example, if it is in a typical power plant, you would have morning shifts, you would have night shifts, right? So how do you manage that manpower? Also comes under the production management, because your motive is to make sure that the employees that are working in that facility, they are well taken care of, and also to make sure that the efficiency of the entire plant is at the maximum. So you have to maintain that shifts that go into picture. Then you also have the question in which the quantity in which you have to produce or manufacture a particular thing, right? For that, you would need, as I already mentioned, forecasting and also aggregate planning. You would require that to make sure everything is as per the company's vision and as per the way company wants it to be. It should not be in a very haphazard manner. It should be in a more smooth and dynamic manner. Now we'll know what are the various functions of production management. The first is a work authorization preparation. So what does this mean? So setting up any plant, you would require a lot of different types of, permissions from the government, from let's say the environmental agencies, from the tax regulators, from the food process. If it is any food plant, you would need the permission of food departments. You should have lot of various permissions in hand. So if you have a lot of employees, so you would have also an employee management system. You need permissions for various activities that you're conducting. So all that comes under work authorization, right? So you need to make sure that that is also in line with what you are doing currently. Then comes product specification preparation. Now, if you are making something, you would first make a rough draft for it. You'll make something on paper. For example, if you are making let's say steel rods out of steel, right? So you would have the diameter of that steel rod that you want to make, the length of every steel rod that you have to make. So that comes under product specification. It's a very technical thing to know that the designers that would be involved, they would be making it on the sheet of paper and then giving it across to make it prototypes out of it, and then finally start the production. Then comes the construction of a detailed work plan. Yeah, so for example, I'll again take the example of steel plant. Then if raw materials are iron ore and carbon, then you would have various departments to it, where the iron ore will be melted, the carbon would be segregated. So all that stuff would come under the detailed work plan, how the process will be. And also, if it is a very big facility like a steel plant, you would also require certain things like trucks to transport from every department to other department, right? So you would have railway lines maybe somewhere to make sure that the departments are interconnected to each other. So you need a detailed work plan for that. Then you have to determine the needs of material control. How much materials has to be come in for production? You don't want to have lot of raw materials while the production is low. The reason behind this is we'll learn that in inventory control in the further module, but the main reason is that you would encounter excess stock situation. So your inventory carrying cost, the storage cost of that particular thing will go high, and you want to make sure your costs are minimum, right? And maximum output is generated. So determining the needs of material compose is also essential. Then comes determining the needs of tool management. If you have an industry that requires lot of tools, you have to take care of that tools. You should have a facility that is involved in the repair of those tools, because tool management is also essential part, right? You cannot buy new tools every time. You need to also service the tools that are currently existing, that are currently in production, in the use in production. So you need to determine that the needs that is required in tool management. Then comes determining the needs of equipment and manpower control. So the equipments that you use, the big, let's say you are using turbines, you need to make sure that you are servicing those turbines. And also you need to make sure the manpower is structured in such a way that one shift of people does not feel the load. You divide it into multiple shifts, right? Morning shift, evening shift, night shift. So you divide it into certain way in which the load of the employees is less, so that they can also do much more better during their hours. They are much more efficient in the way they are working. Then you need to check the progress of the task against the timetables or the timelines that you are running, right? You don't want to lose out on any big orders from the clients that have been coming. You want to make sure that everything is smoothened in a way that your timelines are met in a more appropriate manner. You always strive to be on time. That is how a production facility work. So these are the functions of production management that we are talking about. Finally, the production planning and production management, it has various levels of components in it, right? We'll know about that in greater depth in the coming modules. The first one is aggregate planning. How do you plan the short-term way of manufacturing, forecasting, if there are any risk involved, long-term planning is involved, a lot of machines are involved. How do you structure it in a way that it is the most efficient to everyone? For example, if you have three different machines, right? And each one, so if machine A, the product of machine A, the end result of machine A is the starting material for machine B, the end product of machine B is the starting product of machine C. So if it is in this way, what is the most optimum way in which you can put the raw materials in machine A, so that the end result after machine C is time bound? It should not be the wastage of time, right? It should be all inclined in such a way that you have, some things may overlap, but the most important aspect is that your efficiency should be maintained. It should not reduce. Then comes materials requirement planning, the need for material requirement. How do you plan it? What are the various ways in which you can plan it? We'll all know that. Then is inventory control. We'll know what are the inventory levels. How do you maintain it? How do you find the economic order quantity that will reduce your total cost while keeping the production smooth? Then comes assembly line balancing. How would you balance the various departments so that no one department is overloaded? You need to maintain a perfect sync between all the departments. Then plant location. How do you manage the plant? Where do you set up the plant? What are the various requirements to see when you are establishing a plant? For example, do you have ready water available there, right? You should not have water shortages. Is the power optimum? The power supply, the electric lines, everything is optimum. Is the soil not to lose, because you have to set up a major facility over there? So all these things come under plant location, and we'll know all about that in greater depth going forward. So let's talk about the first module, that is aggregate planning. Now, what does aggregate planning tells us? So aggregate planning is the practice of planning the amount and timing of production across an intermediate time horizon. Now the term here, amount and timing, holds value. Why? Because aggregate planning tells us when and what needs to be manufactured, at what time it needs to be manufactured. Also, it helps us to maintain the total cost of production at the minimum level. Now, another most important term in this sentence is intermediate time horizon. What does this mean? This means that aggregate planning is supposed to be something which is very short term. Means it stands in 3 months till 18th months is considered as aggregate planning time period. That's why it is called as intermediate time horizon. The second point is that the goal is to accommodate variable consumer demand and utilizing the labor that is available to us, the materials, the raw materials that are available to us, the capital and the other resources that we have. Given the forecast, through forecasting, we'll get what are the things that we require, and to utilize the plant capacity at the fullest. That is what aggregate planning is. Now, the second thing that comes to our brain is what is the objective behind it, right? So, the main objective is to maximize the customer service. So, there should not be any delay in the production time and the shipment time. So, it should all be included in this so that you can maximize the customer service, right? The customer satisfaction should be maximum when you have such high loads of work that needs to be completed at a large scale. Second is minimizing the inventory investment. What does this mean? This means that you need to make sure your inventory costs are minimum. What are the inventory costs? It can be the inventory carrying costs, it can be the back order or the shortages that you have occurred, it can be the ordering cost, or we mentioned inventory carrying cost, shelf period. So all these things come under the inventory costs. Next is to minimize the workforce level. So you don't want to gather more and more workforce with more idle time. You want the optimum amount of workforce because you have to give salaries, right? So you need to maintain the optimum amount of workforce which is required to do that particular job and nothing else. Then comes you need to minimize the production rates, which means that you need to make sure when you are using electricity, at what time you are using the electricity. Are you wasting your electricity on useless stuff that is not required? Are you utilizing the water in the appropriate manner? So all these things come under the management of production rates. Then comes maximizing the plant and the machinery that you are using. So you should make sure that when you have purchased an expensive machine, so in your billing hours, that should be utilized in the most appropriate manner. It should not be like you have purchased a machine and you use it once in a month, which is a waste to the company, right? So you need to make sure any investment that you're doing on the equipments and machinery play an important and integral part in the outcome of any project that you're dealing with, right? Any production, at the end, it should hold value, that why you have purchased it. You should be accountable for why you have purchased a particular equipment or machinery. So all these things come under the aggregate planning in production management. So next, let's talk about what are the variables that are included in aggregate planning. So the first component is called the changing the employment or workforce level. Now this strategy suggests that if the production rate, right, if the production rate is high or low, that does not matter. The production rate according to the company will remain stable, but according to the production rate, you will lay off your employees or you will hire the employees, right? You need to match the production rate, what is happening, so that to exactly meet the demand. So that is what is considered in changing the employment or workforce level. You hire off certain employees, you take certain employees when the demand is really high, the production rate, you have to meet the demand, and you would lay off those particular employees when the demand is less, right? For example, if Diwali, right, you would plan Diwali around August or September, right? So at that time, you would want to produce more. So at that particular time, you would be hiring more people. So after the festive season is over, you would lay off the employees because they are not needed for your production. So this is the first thing, that is changing the employment or workforce level. The second part is overtime, idle time, and part-time strategy. So in this particular strategy, what exactly happens is that your workforce level remains constant throughout the year. But when you have more demand, you would make them do overtime. You would, of course, pay them for overtime, but you would include that overtime component during the production facility. So the hours will be longer. But when the demand is less, you would give them ideal time. So that is what is included in overtime, idle time, and part-time strategy. So some of the service industries, they also employ part-time workers like interns or something to meet the demand that is currently going through. So that is the part-time strategy that is included. This third component is called changing the inventory levels. Now this particular variables, it involves maintaining a constant production level, as well as the workforce should be constant. What happens with that is that you need to make sure your inventory is large enough to absorb all the fluctuations that are occurring in demand and supply. So all the fluctuations that happen, they need to be catered through by absorbing, or if there is excess inventory that is left, right? So you would make sure that during the times when the demand is really high, you utilize them there. When the demand is low, you bulk up your stores. So this is what is included in changing the inventory level. Then comes back order strategy. So this is the thing that happens when you have very high demand, but the customers are willing to pay well in advance. So for example, if automobile, right, you place the order to buy a new vehicle, if there is a long queue, you would have to wait for like 2 to 3 months or even a year, right? So you would take the orders, as a company would take the orders from those customer, then fulfill those particular demands in the future. So the back order or the negative inventory would be generated during that time. So the future production would be used to meet the past demand, the past customer acceptance that you got, past customer requests that you got, you would meet them in the next or subsequent quarters. So this is what is meant by back order strategy. The next component is called subcontracting. Now in this particular strategy, what happens is that some of the material, for example, if an automobile company is there, you would have to build the entire car, right? So seats would be there, or steering wheel would be there, or certain light elements would be there, that would be procured from third party vendors, so that your production costs are minimized. You just have to pay them the money to get that particular component. So this is called subcontracting. So it results what in what we have to make sure, when you are using this particular thing called subcontracting, your cost will go high because you have to take the entire thing from someone else. So they are also in business to make money. So you would have to pay more, and even the quality would not be guaranteed. If you are making that a particular product for yourself, you would make sure that that is to the highest quality. But if you're getting it, you're procuring it from someone else, third party vendors, the quality is compromised. You would not get the quality that you want, or maybe you would get it depending on how good the third party vendor is. Then comes changing the plant capacity. Now in a production live, you have lot of stations: station 1, station 2, station 3, station 4. So when the demand is high, what would you do? You would make sure all the 4 stations are running, up and running in the production line. But the capacity of the plant would get reduced when you are only utilizing one of those particular lines or two of those particular lines. So capacity can be changed, the plant capacity can be changed, right, according to the need. Right, according to the need, you can set aside the machines, you can make them idle when you want to, you can only use the ones that are required. That would lead to saving money from electricity and power. You're not utilizing that particular component, but you have to again pay the money for its services, the servicing of that particular component or product. So these were the variables of aggregate planning. So the next topic that we are trying to understand is called forecasting. Now, after knowing about aggregate planning, forecasting actually tells us what is the demand that is being utilized, or that is being required in the upcoming months. Now, what does this mean? This means, in a broader sense, that what is the demand that your company or your business entity would have to deal with in the upcoming ones. That can be done qualitatively or quantitatively. We'll know about both of them in this module. So first we'll know what are the uses of forecasting. Number one, it helps in the production schedule preparation. Now you need to make proper schedule of what you're doing, how the production is going to happen, what are the different modes in which the production will happen. So all that thing will be considered under forecasting. Then comes the requirement of raw materials. So you would have to note down what are the quantity of raw materials you are trying to build in. Also, you need to find out what are the third party vendors that you are dealing with, what their quality checks, do they meet the standards that your company is dealing with? So these are the things that are required to be known in advance. Then comes the preparation of purchase plan. The quantity of those third party vendor raw materials that you're buying, what is the quantity that is required, and that also about knowing what is the economic order quantity of these items so that your total cost is at the minimum level. Then comes the expansion of new product development, and technology related decisions need to be taken. Now, expansion into a new continent or a new area that is not explored by a company recently. So knowing about that, new product lines have to be addressed to if the company is planning on making a new product. So you need to do all the market survey, everything needs to be made such that your product does not fail when it enters the market. So all these things need to be catered well in advance using forecasting. Then comes subcontracting schedule preparation. What are the things you need to subcontract, where you need to subcontract, all these things. What are the timelines in which the materials will come so that your go down or the inventory that you are maintaining, they are not very high in levels or very low in levels. Then comes how much manpower is required. Like you need to hire people, you need to lay off people, you need to give them overtime. So all these things need to be considered in manpower requirements determination. How much manpower is required for that particular product that you are doing. You should not have excess manpower. You need to have the optimum level of manpower that is required to do that particular task. And also, if certain tasks required extremely skilled level of workers, you need to make sure you get the workers that are skilled in that particular domain. You don't want to, waste your time first making those workers skilled and then doing that particular project. You need to make sure that they are already skilled in the work that they are doing, right? Then comes equipment requirements determination. What are the equipments that you need to require? For example, if you have a steel plant, you have different shafts, or thermal power plants, so you have different turbines that may be rotating in that particular plants. So in the maintenance of that, you would have another department that constantly deals with the repair and the work to fix the broken parts. So all these things, the equipment requirement, the how much extra materials you need to require, how much extra machines you need to require, right? Lathe machines, you have drilling machines, all those things you have to consider in well in advance to know what type of load you are dealing with. Then comes the budgeting. How much budget needs to be allocated to what department? What are the various things that are required? Cash components are required, right? Different components would have different pricing, different vendors would have different pricing. So what vendor to select, how much budget you need to allocate. So all that things come under the cash budgeting. And all these things is hit and try. You need to try out what is the best suitable in the more optimum manner so that the entire cost of what you're doing comes to the minimum level. That is the task, that is the aim. Also, you have to maintain the level of perfection that a company requires. You have to set the standards really high so that you can progress much further faster to the levels you want to achieve, right? So all these things need to be taken care of when we are doing forecasting. Now, next thing is what are the steps that are involved in forecasting. Now, as I mentioned before, they are both qualitative and quantitative in nature. What would qualitative mean? Qualitative mean doing the market research, knowing what your competitors are doing it accordingly, what is suited best, learning from the mistakes of others. So this is what would happen in the qualitative measures. Quantitative would be more of using like moving averages, exponential moving average. So all that things you need to consider while calculating the demand for the coming months, right? I'll show you how. I'll use an example, I'll use a model, and then I'll show you how it is done. So, but before that, what are the steps that are involved in forecasting? The number one step is determining which things will be projected. What are the things, what are the components that need to be projected when we are doing a particular project or a task? Then is choosing what is the time horizon that you need to deal with, right? Whether it is a short term thing, a medium term thing, or a long term thing, right? The prediction must provide a time period, keeping in mind that the accuracy, it depends on what is your timeline, right? In the next slide, I'll tell you what exactly is short, medium, and long, and what are the ways in which you deal with all the three time frames. But before that, what pick the right forecasting model, right? There are different models. You need to pick which one is most suitable to your approach. Then comes collect the information required for forecasting model. For example, if some model requires knowing the demands of previous months, so you need to have that well in advance when you are calculating for the future months. So that is collecting the information that is required for the forecasting models. Then comes you need to produce a forecast, then you need to come to a number. Using the model, you need to come to a particular number, right? Particular number, you need to come to a number that tells us what is the demand in the coming month, right? Then accordingly you have to act, you have to make that, you have to go again to the aggregate plan, you have to make the adjustments in that plan. You need to make sure all the production rate are according to the demand that is required, right? Everything needs to be done in pertaining to the demand that is coming, right? So all this is the steps that are required, that are involved in forecasting. Now we mentioned about what are the three time frames, that is short range, medium range, and long range. Now short range deals with more of 3 to 7 months of the upcoming things that are coming in. For example, if you have Diwali that is coming in, or if you have a major festival that is coming in, so 3 to 5 months in advance you need to make sure all the demand requirements are catered to. So that is the short range forecast. Now in this you can use highly quantitative methods can be utilized, because the time frame is pretty short and you have the numbers of the months that are there, like 3 to 5 months. You can get a good picture of the months that are there. You can actually have a very good idea of what demand would be. Then comes medium range forecast, that is usually 1 to 2 years, right? So this would also deal in more of the things that are coming. If a new product line is coming in, so how do you cater to that in the next 2 years? So all these things would be considered in the medium range forecast. Again, this would require regression models, this would require knowing about the market research, and also the quantitative models like simple moving average, exponential moving average can give a very good accuracy, right? If not 100%, but it can give a good 80 to 70 to 80% of efficiency about knowing the exact amount of demand. Then comes the long range forecast. Now this usually is from 3 to 5 years time frame. Now this is a very long term perspective. 5 years, lot can change, right? For example, if a company would be making 5 year plan in 2019, right, that would have been flopped. The reason is because COVID happened, right? COVID happened, so exactly the things how the companies projected would not, they would not have accomplished it. So this way, this can change a lot, and this is not very accurate things. The quantitative models would not work in this particular scenario. So what you have to do in that case, you have to purely believe in what market research says. Now let's talk about the quantitative model that we are trying to understand. So we'll know about one model, that is simple moving average model. Now this model is very famous in terms of determining the forecast. Now let me give you the numbers first. Let's say you have of 3 months, January, you have the demand for in January you have the demand as, let's say, 3,350. In February, you have demand of, let's say, 100. In March, you have the demand of 250, right? And you need to calculate what would be the demand in April. So this would be some scenario, right? You need to check the demand. So what does the simple moving average states? It states that the forecasting of T plus 1, now T is the current month, okay, would be the sum of last n demands whole divided by the chosen number of time period. All right. So how would that occur in this particular scenario? Let's look at that first. So in this particular scenario, f t plus 1 is April, because we need to calculate the demand for April. So f of April would be the demand of the last n terms. In this case, n demands. So in this case, we have three: January, February, and March. So we will combine those demands. So 350 divided by 3, right? So whatever the answer comes for this would be the demand for April, right? You could accurately calculate this. So this is the model called simple moving average model for forecasting the demand for ft plus 1, where t is the current time period and t plus 1 is the next time period in which you have to calculate the forecast. Now let's discuss the first module that we will be talking about, that is called what is inventory control. Now to begin with, we would first define what does inventory mean. Now inventory in the most simplest terms would mean the goods or the stocks that are present with a particular business entity or a company. Now these stocks, what are these stocks, right? To simplify it even further, you would have shopped on Mintra, on Amazon, on Flipkart, right? One day or the other you would have shopped from these sites. So you would see that there are certain things that you must have liked to buy, but they were out of stock. Now, what does this out of stock mean? This means that they are not present in the warehouses of these particular companies, which means the inventory was not maintained. That is why it went out of stock. So inventory basically means the goods that are present in stock of that particular company or business entity. Now, inventory control is also termed as stock control. It is the process of companies' inventory levels being managed, right? Controlling that particular warehouse, the levels of stock in that particular warehouse is called as inventory control, whether it is their own facility or multiple locations across the country. Now, you may have a big company like Amazon, Flipkart, Mintra. They would have multiple locations across the country. But while there are some small or medium enterprises which are small scale and which does not have much of the warehouses across the country, they would have one or two in certain locations, right? So different types of companies have different types of inventory levels, right? They, some are small scale, some are large scale, right? To cater to all of these things, you need a particular management system, right? For example, if I am sitting in North India and some of the stocks are in South India, right? You don't want that particular item to travel so far across from the south to the north. Would incur charges on transportation, on shipments, right? You would want that particular item that the customer bought to be the nearest, at the nearest hub to that particular customer, right? So this is what it means. It means controlling, it means maintaining that stock throughout. It means about keeping track of your storage, maintaining a very successful supply chain, maintaining and controlling the aspects in which you are not in a situation in which stock out happens. You don't want your customers to lose out on the experience that a company is. So an inventory control system keeps track of these movement, usage, and also the storage of that particular goods. So next we'll talk about what is the importance of this inventory control. Why are we even learning it, right? Now, inventory control is not a management per se subject. It includes mathematics as well. It includes the aspects in which you need to calculate certain stuff, right? So it's considered as a more technical subject, right? You need to maintain a perfect balance between how the situations are at present and also the usage of numbers to make sure the processes that are involved in it, the processes in which you are maintaining it as the head of that unit, would be streamlined. It should not go beyond the control of the circumstances. So, for example, what would happen during the COVID times, right? There was a sudden lockdown. Sudden lockdown would mean that the inventory levels would have been dropped because the movement of items was barred. The movement of shipments was barred for a point of time. So, this means that the inventory, the raw materials that would be coming in would have been out of stock, or there would be certain excess things that have been made by a particular company in an industry that would have been piled across, right? That would not have been moved. So we don't want excess inventory, we don't want under inventory. We want the perfect balance of that inventory. The levels should be maintained. There should not be more stock, because more stock would mean more inventory carrying cost, and companies want to reduce that inventory carrying cost. So that is why it is a must to know what type of inventory you have, how much scale of inventory you have. The first point that we are talking about is forecasting of demands and right sale predictions, helping in controlling the inventory. Now, the levels of inventory, the levels of goods that are kept in your godowns should be maintained in a way. For example, if the months of October is the month where in which you have festive season in India, right? You have Diwali, you have lot more festivals during that period. Now, in tendency of these festivals, people tend to buy more stuff. You don't want the company to behave the same way as they used to do across the year. The reason is that if you are producing something for the same levels of demand, right, then it would make sense to maintain the inventory straight throughout. But during a festive season, the demand increases exponentially. So your supply to that particular thing, your inventory level should also increase. You should be prepared for that particular sale, that okay, a lot of people are buying my product. Now I need to maintain the inventory so that it would not be a situation in which the stock out happens. That is a very negative thing for any company who is dealing in any sort of thing that is consumer based. Second is inventory turnover ratio. So this ratio enables us to evaluate the efficiency and effectiveness of managing the inventory, right? You need to make sure it is more efficient and effective in terms of delivery to the customer and also to your suppliers. You don't want your suppliers to be hanging in the middle. You want them to be also responsive in the way you are, right? And you want to be responsive to your customers. So all that things are taken into account when we are talking about inventory control. Any shortage of inventory can cost a lot to your business or the business opportunity you have. Why is the word business opportunity used? So consumers are very choosy, right? They have the choice. If I, as a brand, are not able to fulfill their demands, they will shift to some other brand. They don't have that patience to wait for you, right? If you lose out on your inventory, if a particular company is giving them products at home in 4 days, while the other company is delivering it to them in just a matter of 1 day, then they would definitely choose the one in which the delivery is 1 day, right? So you need to make sure that these things, the inventory management and control, are such that you don't have to make the customers wait. And also you need to keep your costs low. You don't want to burden yourself with heavy costs, that if you're sending something, you're not supposed to make sure that one thing is sent in entire one truck. You want to send more stuff in that truck because it will reduce the cost of sending that product from your manufacturing hub to the customer, right? So these control systems have to be maintained across the channel, across the network. Now, complex operational procedure firms need to have a clear systems to eliminate the delays due to unavailability of materials. I just give you an example of COVID. During the COVID times, you had a major supply chain shortage. You had a major roadblock in between because most of the services were hampered. People were at home, so there was not a lot of movement. Even the demand went down because people were too scared to get out of their homes, right? So you cannot, for a company, for example, a company would be, let's say, something that a company that makes bread, let's say bread or any other thing. If the demand goes down and that particular entity, the particular material, bread, it gets expired in 2 to 3 days. So they cannot keep that much level of inventory on in their godown. They have to continuously move that particular thing. Otherwise, that particular inventory would be a waste to the company. So you need to make sure during the deadlines, during the timelines, how streamlined your inventory control systems are. Otherwise, the most important aspect, you lose out on a lot of money as a brand, and also you would lose on the trust of the customers. Complex operational procedure firms need to have clear inventory management system. Clear, they should it should be absolutely clear to eliminate any sort of delays that are happening. Any sort of delays are not a part of this particular thing. Now, another most important aspect that keeps coming up to me is, what is the difference between inventory control and inventory management? Now, to give you a more basic thing, they are blurred lines. They are not clear mandate that what is inventory management, what is inventory control. But inventory control is a sort of subset to inventory management. It comes under the bigger umbrella of supply chain and logistics management, in which you manage everything. You manage the way things are moving in from your storage units to different parts and within your storage units, right? So let's see what it is. Now, forecasting and ordering stocks are handled through inventory management. Forecasting of the demand, for example, the festive season that would have been come up, the Halloween season, the Diwali season, the New Year season, the Christmas season. So all these stuff, they need to pre-plan. They need to pre-plan 4 to 5 months in advance. They need to look at what are the things that they need to focus on, right? Inventory control, on the other hand, is a component of management that deals with the current stock that you're handling right now. It doesn't care about what is happening in the near future, what is happening in the history. It just cares about what is the current thing that you have in hand. You should have a safety stock so that just in the worst case scenarios like COVID, you don't lose out on a lot of stuff. And also you need to make sure that the current stock is in good efficient manner to send out to the customer. Then is inventory management refers to the complete process of estimating demand, placing orders, and keeping track of goods on hand, right? Inventory control is in charge of the inventory levels inside the particular warehouse. Now you have various big hubs, right, in which all the different types of storage units are kept. Now you need to make sure you as inventory control head would be in charge of that levels would not fall below the levels that are required. It should be optimum to the way in which you are efficient, your company's systems are effective in terms of delivery. Then comes inventory management. Inventory management follows a bigger pattern. It follows a lot more monitoring that happens. Now, in inventory control, the monitoring happens on a daily basis. They just check current stock, they just check what is happening with that particular segment in that particular time. It does not care about what happens later and what happens before. It just cares about the thing that is in the present, right? As a part of a broader inventory management system, I already mentioned that it is a subset of inventory management and in the bigger umbrella of supply chain and logistic management. So the next topic that we will be discussing in this particular course is the economic order quantity. Now, what does this mean? This means that there will be some times when the company would want to know how much they have to reorder in order to maintain their inventory levels. So all the companies don't have all the supplements or all the things that are required to make their final product with themselves. So they prefer to recruit it through third party vendors, right? They get it from external suppliers. For example, if a car is there, right, you get batteries from some other company, you get the nuts and bolts from some other company, you would get the seats from some other company. So all these things combined together would make your final product. So in order to know that all the inflow of these raw materials are in time or are at the perfect time in your inventories, you need to make sure that the cost that is incurred to you at the minimum level. So what would happen in that scenario? So economic order quantity is that such term that would help to make sure that your total costs are maintained at the lowest. So economic order quantity describes the size of the order at which the ordering cost would be equal to the inventory carrying cost such that the total cost would be at the minimum, right? So the orders are done on a specific quantity which brings in only the expenses while ordering. Carrying cost, ordering costs, and stock out costs are taken into account to decide the quantity or the frequency of it, right? So now let's look at what are the various costs that are involved in economic order quantity. So the first cost that would be incurred is called the inventory carrying cost. Now, these type of costs they arise on the account of maintaining the inventory, and they are generally directly proportional to the size of inventory as well as the time period over the which they are considered, right? So this would be the cost of money that has been spent up to build up those inventories. Second would be the cost of the storage that have would have been incurred. For example, there would be certain situations in which you would have go downs in which all the raw materials would have been kept. Now if there are two axes of inventories, the cost of storing that particular raw material would go high. So in order to curtail that, you would need to know what is the optimum amount of quantity that should be maintained in your storage to make your total cost at the minimum, right? Also there can be certain materials like for example dairy materials or bread, those who have a very short shelf life, right? To order to maintain that, you would need refrigeration units, you would need a lot of temperature control going on. So to set up all those refrigeration unit, all the temperature control and everything, you would require money, right? So that would also be considered in the inventory carrying cost. The second type of cost that occurs is called the ordering cost. Now this involves the things that you purchase from the third party vendors. Now what are these third party vendors? Again, as I mentioned before, that if a particular thing has to be made, it has to be made from considering all the suppliers, right? A car has to be made, so battery would come from somewhere else, the nuts and bolts would come from somewhere else, even the seats and the steering wheel would come from somewhere else. So in order to make sure all the assembly is in place, you would require third party vendors. Now you would order the bill to them, right? You would make a complete order to them. Now the cost of processing that requisition, determining what is the order quantity that is required, making, calling for the notations, making the notations, maintaining the record of materials that you purchase, so all of these things would come under the ordering cost. Even preparing the reports, right, and making the payments would come under the inventory ordering cost. Okay, so the third cost that is incurred is called the shortage loss cost. Okay, the shortage cost. Now, what is this? This is mostly the cost that incurs when there is a delay in meeting the demand that the customer has posed. So you may be in a situation in which you cannot fulfill the demand that the customer has put forward. So in that case, that could come under the shortage cost. That would happened with X number of reasons. For example, due to the COVID crisis, a lot of supply chains were disrupted, right? So you could have a shortage of raw materials coming in. Currently, in the market, in the mobile phone market, there is a shortage of silicon chipsets. Hence, the price of mobile phones are increasing. So there can be certain reasons in which your the things that have been involved, the things that are going on, would lead to the shortage, right, or stock out situations happening. Or maybe if there is a festive season and you are not prepared, your company is not prepared to handle the heavy burdens of the festive season, you may also encounter stock out situations in which the penalty has to be paid to the customer if there is a delay in the shipment. You would have to deal with, for example, if it is an off season and your stocks are lining up in your inventory shelves, right? So the idle equipment that would get wasted would also come under the shortage cost. Then the layoff expenses, so you may have to lay off a lot of your workforce in order to maintain the thing, that would also come under this. So if all these things are come under the shortage cost, now where does the economic order quantity fit in? Now economic order quantity, as mentioned before, it comprises of equating the inventory carrying cost and the ordering cost such that your total cost remains at the minimum. Now let me show you with an example of how this is done. So let's make a graph of the annual cost to the order quantity. This is the order quantity, and this side we have the total annual costs. Total annual cost. Now, as we'll discuss now, if you are ordering something in bulk amounts, right? If you're ordering it in bulk amounts, your orders, the frequency of your orders will be less. Hence, the cost occurred in ordering due to ordering cost would be less, right? If you consider order in bulks. Whereas if you are ordering smaller amounts with higher frequency, that would cost you more because the ordering cost will go high, right? Whereas if you order large quantities, your holding cost, your inventory carrying cost would increase because you have to use your godowns to store in lot of raw materials initially. So if I have to represent this on a graph, how would that occur? That would be a straight line because it's directly proportional to the quantity, right? The As the quantity increases, your inventory carrying cost, the inventory carrying or holding costs would increase, right? So it would increase with the order quantity and the cost will also go high. Whereas on the other hand, the cost will be high if you're ordering smaller quantities and the cost will be low if you're ordering higher quantities. That's why it's always recommended. That's why it is always recommended to give your order in bulks with lesser frequencies. Now, considering these two opposite scenarios in which if you have to order more, the holding cost will be high. If you order more, the ordering cost will be low. So to make sure that this thing is handled in the most appropriate manner, you'll take the combination of these two scenarios and you will have a scenario in which this is all done mathematically. So there will be a situation, there will be a point here where these two intersect, and on the conclusion of these two things, you would get a point, right? Now, this is the quantity that you have to order and is also referred to as economic order quantity. Now, this is the total cost. This is the total cost that you would have to incur for that particular order. Okay. So, this is the cost that would be incurred at this economic order quantity. So, this is what the economic order quantity tells us, that it tells us that you have to maintain the inventories in such a manner that your total cost should be minimum with no delays and with no extra holding cost. All right. So next, let's look at what is assembly line balancing. Now, we've talked about different departments in a production facility. Now, let's look at different stations in a particular department. It's basically micromanaging every department. How does it function? So, the assembly line balancing is basically assigning work to assembly line stations. So, what is the purpose for that? In order to achieve the necessary production rate with the smallest number of assembly stations. Now, this particular method of assembly line balancing, it evolves around the philosophy or the purpose in which you need to make sure that minimum number of equipments are used to do a task, and also the minimum time is required. So let's say that if you want to go from A to C, right? So the shortest path would be going from A to C. But if you're going from A to B, then B to C, that would take a lot of time and consume a lot of, resources, manpower resources, power, electric energy supply resources, and also the equipments, right? They would also need more maintenance. So you need to make sure what is the most optimum thing that is required to perform a particular task, right? So for example, if you are drilling a hole and then you need to counter bore it to make it little more big, right? So you won't just bore it directly. You would first make a drill, then bore, expand that hole little longer, little bigger, right? So this is what you do. You don't go about doing it in a more haphazard way. You just do it in the most simplest manner and the most efficient manner possible. So line balancing can be done when a line is first set up or when it needs to be rebalanced to modify the production rate, right? We discussed in the first module about expanding the production line, right? So this is what it means, right? Modify its production rate, or when a product or a process changes, right? We don't regularly need to change what we are currently doing. We need to set it up in the most optimum manner and continuously do and go about that. So what are the steps that would be involved in assembly line balancing? So the first step would be defining the task, breaking down the work into parts or smaller task which is the smallest unit of work that can be completed at that particular time. Second is the established time constraints for each job or activity. You need to block certain time schedules for each station. For example, if one station takes drilling station, let's say, takes 20 minutes, counter boring or boring station takes 15 minutes, so you need to time block it that one particular work piece would require this much amount of time. So all these things need to be considered in blocking the time for that particular station. Then comes determining the priority needs and create a network diagram. So priority needs in the broader sense is, if a company has three different products, let's say Colgate has three different varieties of toothpaste, so the one that sells the most gets the highest priority. So determine the priority needs and create a network diagram in which stating which how the production facility will produce that particular line at what time. So all that things need to be considered. Then comes, based on the desired production rate, calculate the cycle duration and the minimum number of stations. I'll tell you in detail how to calculate all these in the next slide. Then comes assigning the job to each station using the assignment that satisfied the precedence relationship and the cycle time. Again, it's the same thing. How do you define, how do you utilize that station in the most efficient manner, assigning it, knowing what are the processes are involved in that station itself. If a station requires a set procedure, you need to follow that to the last level. Then comes evaluate the effectiveness on the line. Now this needs to be done from time to time. You need to evaluate if the processes that you are following is effective or not. It has a formula. I will tell you what it is. All right, now let's talk about the terms that we are using. That is, first is the cycle time. So now what exactly is the cycle time? Now this is represented by the letter C. Now this is the maximum time that is allowed for a work on a unit at a particular station. So what does this mean? This means that the time that is required for one particular activity to be completed when the work comes to the system and it goes out to the station, right? So that is called the cycle time. Now how do we calculate it? So C is equal to the time that is available to us to the time to the desired output rate, right? This is how you would calculate a particular cycle time. Now after this you need to calculate what is the theoretical number of stations that are required, that is the minimum number of stations that are required to achieve that particular desired output, right? So the number of stations that would be required would be nt. We'd consider the theoretical number of stations as nt. That is the time required, that is the time required to assemble one complete unit or one complete work, whole divided by the cycle time that we just calculated, right? So this will give us the desired, the minimum number of stations that are required. Then the last thing that we discussed was the efficiency of that assembly line, remember? So the efficiency of the assembly line, which would be equal to what we just calculated. I'll just go scroll back. So we just calculated nt, right? That is the theoretical number of stations. This would be the time required to assemble one unit again, which we will sum by summation t, divided by this time we will calculate what is the actual number of minimum stations that are required, right? Into the cycle time and into 100. So, or basically, in more literal sense, what we can say, this is theoretical number of minimum number of stations divided by the actual number of stations that you will calculate. That is not theoretical, so you would have to gather data for it, right? Into 100. That would give you the efficiency of that assembly line, right? This is how you calculate the assembly line balancing. This is the variables that are required to be known when you are learning about the assembly line balancing. All right, now let's take a more deeper depth on the physical aspect of any plant or any production facility, that is the location of that plant. Now when I talk about location, what does it mean? It means the process of identifying an appropriate area for a company's activity to determine what is the best suited type of facility with low total cost. Now what are the factors that are included in selecting a plant location? Now just imagine if I open an IT company in a rural area, would it have an impact? No, right? Because the clients would not be more flexible in coming to rural areas. Similarly, if I have to, make an agricultural workshop or a cold storage unit, I would prefer to make it near the fields, near those agricultural fields, right? If I make it in the city, that would be of no use because you have to then travel from the rural area to the urban area for that particular activity. Now, in such scenarios, you need to find what is the most suited location of your plant, of your production facility. So, the first factor that plays the most crucial role is called the availability of raw resources or raw materials, we can say. So, the availability of these raw materials should be the topmost priority to consider. If your raw materials are far off from the place, from the production facility, then the cost incurred, first of all, you have to maintain that whatever thing is coming from that area, they would not destroy due to the temperature but during the transportation. Second, the cost of transportation, right? The cost of transportation would increase massively if you have a plant location very far off from the raw materials, right? For example, again, if you have to make steel, you have to find iron ore. So you can't make the steel plant in a northern area because you won't have iron fields there. You need to make sure that they are in location which are near to the iron ores, right? So this is one consideration that you have to take. The second aspect is called the availability of transportation facilities. Now, transportation facilities, what does this include? This include that it should be well connected with waterways, airways, and railways and even roadways, right? That is the most important part. So, for example, let me consider in India, you have Vishakhapatnam steel plant. That plant is located in a port city of Vishakhapatnam. Now, this is well connected by air, it is well connected by roads, it is well connected by waterway, it is well connected by railways. So, all these four aspects are tick mark, right? So, this is the most appropriate place where you can open a a production facility of steel, and the raw materials are also nearby. In Andhra Pradesh, you have in Chhattisgarh iron fields, right? So you can actually get a very good optimum amount of efficiency opening a plant in that particular area. Secondly, you need to consider factors like labor availability, right? Labor should be available to you to do your task, right? And also the community attitude. Now this is a very interesting aspect. Now, for example, if you have a chemical plant, right, that emits radiation, you don't want that particular plant to be near a habitual area, right? You want it far from the city. You don't want it to be within the city, to an isolated area it should be, right? So all these things you need to consider while determining what is the exact plant location you want to open it. Thing next is the power availability. The power is required for any production activity that we consider. Power is the most important thing, and in energy aspects, right? You can have your own thermal power plants, or you can have power from the state. You need to purchase it from the state. So either ways, you need to make sure that power is available to you 24/7. Also, water. If you have a thermal power plant, let's say, then the importance of water also increases, right? The availability of water should also be a must. It should also be available 24/7 to you. There is no other means. You have to make sure water is available to you. Then comes is the communication facilities, right? Now, when you are setting up a production plant, let's say a massive production plant, you would have the labor that would come, and you would have the people who are working or in the administrative roles come up there. So they would have their own families. So they would make the surroundings of that production facility. You have the quarters of, let's say, the people who are working, right? You need to make sure they are well connected to the world. You should not make them feel isolated, because they would have children who would be studying in schools, right? Most of the education nowadays is online, so they need to make sure that they are well connected to the networks, so that they could do what they want to do. They have to get stay connected to their friends, watch television. So everything should be available, communication facility should be available. Then comes climate and soil condition. Now this is also a very important aspect to play when it comes to what are the plants that you're looking for, right? What are the plant locations you're looking for? So climate and soil also plays a very crucial role, right? If any production facility requires less humidity, you would want it away from shore locations, right? You want it in, let's say, the mainland, the Indian mainland, right? You would not want it on the coastal areas. The reason is because the humidity is more. So all these things need to be considered as well. Again, the most important aspect is the cost of land. You don't want the place in which your plant is to be too expensive. Generally what happens is government gives subsidies. If you have a plant that is located far off from the city, they would give you subsidies to open up a plant, right? So these are also the things that needs to be considered while selecting a plant location. Then again, this is the most important part in this today's world, that is the pollution limits. Now, for example, you have industries that are on the outskirts of Delhi, right? They need to be shut down for some period, because the smog in Delhi is too high for normal human beings to even breathe properly. The PM, the particles, right, they of 2.5, they are too high there, right? Most polluted cities in the world. So you need to make sure these industries are located well far from the main city area, because you don't want the pollution coming up and affecting the human day-to-day lives in general, right? So all these things need to be taken care of when a production facility is started, a plant location is to be determined. So all these factors play an important and a crucial role in deciding how your production facility will move forward. Now we are at the end of the course. Let's look at what we have learned so far. So we learned about what is production management, what is the importance of production management in the supply chain network. Furthermore, we discussed about what are the various functions of production management. Then we discussed about the various components that are involved in production management, like aggregate planning, forecasting, you have assembly line balancing. So we looked at each of these aspects in greater depth and detail. Then at the end, we discussed about what are the factors that are responsible if your business entity is looking for a plant location to be set up, what are the conditions that are required. We discussed that in greater depth. I hope you had a wonderful session knowing about production management. For more such videos, stay tuned to Great Learning.
If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, I want to request you to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any new update or video releases from Great Learning. If you enjoyed this video, show us some love and like this video. Knowledge increases by sharing, so make sure you share this video with your friends and colleagues. Make sure to comment on the video for any query or suggestions, and I will respond to your comments.